And all questions that we receive this evening will be documented, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible. And we will post the meeting and the summary on the website. And I want to introduce Marcy, who's our interpreter this evening.
Good evening, everyone. La reunión de esta noche va a ser grabada. Yo soy la intérprete de esta noche.
Thank you, Marcy. And I'm Isabel Min. I'm with PlaceWorks. We are assisting California State Parks with the Reimagining Big Basin project. And I want to welcome you to tonight's event. We're really excited to have you here this evening. Just a few housekeeping or introductory items on the Zoom meeting, and I'm going to turn it over to Janet Chang, who's going to explain the Zoom functions.
If you are joining us today and you would like to hear this presentation in Spanish, you will go to the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar and select Spanish.
Si está reuniéndose con nosotros esta noche y necesita interpretación al español, puede seleccionar el mapa mundi que está en la parte inferior de la pantalla y seleccionar el idioma Spanish o español.
So I'm going to turn that on now.
Voy a encender esa función en ese momento y la intérprete estará en ese canal.
One other thing I wanted to mention is that we will be having breakout room sessions later on in the evening. And so if you are needing Spanish interpretation, please raise your hand, or you can also send me a message in the chat. I don't see any raised hands. So I'll be waiting for a message if you need one during the meeting. Feel free to message me anytime during the meeting if you would need, will need Spanish interpretation in the breakout rooms. We can go forward.
Next slide.
If you would like to send a chat, you can send a chat to everyone, or you can send a chat just to me if you're experiencing technical difficulties. There is the chat icon at the bottom of the screen. And if you click that, it will open up a window on your right-hand side where you can select on the drop-down menu who to chat to, and you can type your message below. Next slide. And this is just a view of how it will look on a phone or a tablet. You can access those icons at the top and select chat. Next.
Thank you. So again, I'm Isabel Min. I'm going to do a very quick introduction this evening. Our team at California State Parks. Tonight we're joined by Liz Mcgurk, Chief Deputy Director at State Parks, and the California State Parks project team for Big Basin Reimagining project includes Chris Bohr, Will Fort, Barney Matsumoto, and Jay Chamberlain. And we have a team of folks from PlaceWorks tonight, myself and 9 or 10 other PlaceWorks staff who will be assisting with the facilitation. So we're really excited to be here this evening, and we're glad you have joined us. You may have joined us in our previous events. If you're the first time, we're very excited to have you here for the presentation and the activities that we have planned. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over shortly to State Parks, who will do a welcome, a land acknowledgement, and some updates about what's happening at the park. We're going to give an overview quickly of the planning process, where we've been and what we've done to date. And then we're going to do a presentation about key opportunities and constraints leading up to breakout group activities. And tonight's focus is really taking some of the vision conversations that we've had previously and as part of the survey that many of you have probably taken, to talk more specifically about how the park may be developed or accessed in the future. So we're really excited to have a kind of engaging conversation with you in these discussion groups as part of the workshop this evening. And then we will come back to do a wrap up and have a few more interactive activities with the larger group. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. We're going to do our introductory poll to just get a sense of who's here this evening. You should see a series of questions. There are 4 questions. Please take the time, if you can, to answer them. And if you scroll, you will see the following 2nd, 3rd, and 4th question. I'll just give a minute or 2 for folks to answer. This is just for us to get a sense of who's joining us this evening. Great, you can see the answers coming in. First question, how often did you visit Big Basin prior to its closure following the fire? So it looks like the majority of folks, about 50%, would go to the park several times or 1 to 2 times per year. It's great to have folks here that had not been to the park prior to the fire. We're really excited to engage folks who are excited to access Big Basin in the future. And so it's great to have kind of the wide range of folks here at the meeting. And on the other end, the folks who know the park extremely well and who visited the park several times per week. So it's great to have these ranges of experience and backgrounds. How close do you live to Big Basin? You can see that in the results, folks are coming from some from far, far away, more than 50 miles, as well as a number of folks, maybe about 60%, somewhere between 10 and 50 miles from the park. And then we asked the question, which words best describe the type of experience you envision? You can see the top scoring or most popular response is explore and adventure, followed by wonder and awe at the park, observing and learning. And finally, the 4th question, how did you find out? And we just are always curious to know how folks learned about the event tonight. It looks like the majority, not the majority, but a good number, we're learning from state parks, emails, social media, and you're on our list as well from our previous events. So thanks so much for answering those. We will move on to the next portion. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Bohr, Superintendent with the Santa Cruz District.
Good evening, everybody. It's really nice to see so many people. And thank you for participating. Really, really great to see folks that have spent time in the park and also people here who this might be access to the park in a planning phase where they have never actually been to the park. So that's really exciting. So I'm Chris Spohr. I'm the District Superintendent for State Parks in San Mateo and Santa Cruz. And you will meet several others from state parks from our team throughout the evening, as well as others who are helping to facilitate tonight. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement, and then I will introduce Chief Deputy Director for some welcome remarks. Following that, I will provide a brief update on the fire recovery status of Big Basin. So Big Basin State Park is within the homelands of the Koroste and Cotoni tribes, who were the ancestral relatives of today's Amamutsan tribal band and Muwekma Ohlone tribe. Their removal from these beautiful forests during various historic periods created a false sense of open wilderness for some incoming settlers to admire and eventually strive to conserve. Today, the tribal descendants of the original inhabitants are working with state parks to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and in partnership to reimagine the future of this wonderful place. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Chief Deputy Director of California State Parks, Liz Mcgurk.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Spohr, for the introduction, and thank you all for having me here tonight. I am so excited to be joining you again for this public planning and visioning session to reimagine the future of Big Basin State Park. Once again, my name is Liz Mcgurk. I'm the Chief Deputy Director for California State Parks. And again, I'm proud to be joining you tonight and really want to thank you all for participating in this workshop. I know how hard it can be to take time out of busy evenings to attend these public workshops, but I really want to emphasize how important your participation is to the future of this park. And it's vital that we hear from the public and users of the park about what you want to see and what you want to feel in the reimagined Big Basin. The CZU fire resulted in devastating loss of park infrastructure at Big Basin. And with this loss also comes a reset of the park ecosystems along with this infrastructure. This provides all of us an opportunity to rethink and reconfigure the park's camping, its trails, visitor services, and utilities, and to build and manage them in ways that allow the park to be more resilient to the changing climate and to make the park most welcoming and inclusive to our diverse population. Today's vision workshop is a chance to build on the previous 2 webinars for this project and to have more in-depth conversations about how the principles and ideas can be applied to the vision for the future of Big Basin. Our hope is that the workshop provides an opportunity to learn, but also, and importantly, to contribute to the content of this vision. State Parks is committed to working with the public and partners on the creation of this vision, as this is an opportunity to work as a community to craft this vision to best suit the future needs of the park. As sad as it is to have lost cherished park buildings, we are inspired by the memories of so many park visitors and the willingness of so many of you to translate those memories into new and exciting ideas. We find ourselves with a renewed opportunity to ensure we are planning a park that thinks centuries ahead, inspiring future forest stewardship and creating access for future generations. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Superintendent Spohr. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Liz. Before I begin the fire recovery update, I'd like to acknowledge the widespread impacts and losses this fire inflicted across the community well beyond state parks. As we discuss the recovery and future of Big Basin, we empathize with our neighbors and community members who continue with their recovery process as well. Okay, so after the fire, and this is immediately like in September of 2020, we had to do a thorough impact assessment of the park. So we started by completing our cultural assessments and documentation, in addition to road and trail and facility surveys. FEMA projects and recovery cost estimates were developed from these assessments. And also at this time, we worked with our partners at Caltrans to create safe access to the park along the Highway 236 corridor. This project to make safe the corridor lasted until May of 2021 and ended up removing about 3,300 hazard trees along the roadway. That sounds like a lot of trees. It is. The vast majority of those are Douglas firs that were killed in the fire, and many hardwood understory trees. There were very few redwoods that needed to be removed. The phase 2 cleanup, this is the countywide cleanup sponsored by our partners at Cal OES and Cal Recycle, began in May 2021. That lasted until October. This was an extremely busy time with literally hundreds of people helping us in the park to do this cleanup. This is where contractors removed all the burn debris and vehicles. And this is from well over 100 building sites. They were conducting soil tests And in this phase, removed over 25,000 hazard trees from along the park roads. Again, very few redwood trees needed to come out, but 25,000 trees is a lot of trees to take out along just the roads. And that we haven't started yet on the trails. At this time, the park has no visitor serving infrastructure, so there's still no water, wastewater, gas, or electricity. Big Basin had an average of close to 1 million visitors a year prior to the fire, and most people don't realize the significant amount of park infrastructure that was required to accommodate that level of use. It will take a significant investment and time to reestablish water, wastewater, restrooms, camping, trails, building, electricity, and even basic public safety facilities to allow people to be in the park safely. Since finishing the phase 2 cleanup, Parks is now working with contractors to do additional hazard tree removal. We're working in the core of the park. We're addressing individual trees that were not removed due to more sensitive considerations during the phase 2 efforts. Staff is also working to repair culverts and roads within the park. And although quite dry now, the early winter storms brought large amounts of rain to Big Basin, and these rains caused significant road damage, particularly to Lodge Road, Little Basin Road, and Sky Meadow Road, some of which are still not drivable. Park staff is working and will continue to work in coordination with the County Public Works Department to assess and repair roads in the future. And our focus now is to try and provide some limited public access into the former headquarters area of the basin by summer of 2022. We opened one trail in the visitor center at Rancho del Oso, which is the coastal portion of Big Basin, accessed from Highway 1 last May. If weather cooperates, we hope to have some limited parking serving the Redwood Loop Trail and interior park roads available by summer of 22. And I'd note that removing hazard trees from over the 75 miles of trails will take more time than our roads, as these are even more remote areas with no access for mechanized equipment. We do hope to expand trail access near the historic core first, and moving out from that area into the backcountry as we can. We still have a long way to go, but the significant progress we have made is really due to our dedicated staff and outstanding support we've received from our partners. I will now turn it over to Isby for an overview of the planning process.
Thank you, Chris. My name is Isby Fleischman, and I work with PlaceWorks, and I've had the pleasure to work with state parks on this visioning process. I want to give an overview of the visioning process and make sure everyone's up to date and where we are at, and also give some context for the discussions that we're going to be having in tonight's breakout groups. Next slide. So the visioning process that is currently underway is really just part of a much bigger, longer process for the recovery and establishment of Big Basin, as Chris was describing. You can see here, we are currently in the phase of initial visioning. And the purpose of this process is just to define, or is a big purpose, it's to define the vision that's going to guide all future planning and design efforts. This began last fall, and since then, with your input, we've been building a good foundation for this vision. But this evening, we're going to have the opportunity to get a lot more specific about what this will look like and what the Big Basin experience will be like. This workshop is the finale for the visioning process, and the document that results will be ready this summer. But I do want to make sure you know that this is not the last chance you'll have to participate in the establishment of the park. As you can see along the bottom of this graphic, there are going to be more opportunities coming up in future efforts. Make sure that you're on the project email list if you're not already. You can sign up on the website. The next slide. So the heart of this, the visioning process as the last couple of months has really been on sharing information and on gathering your input and ideas. There's a lot of different strategies we've been using, and I'm just going to walk through some of those and let you know what we've been hearing and how that's been shaping the vision. So we invited people to share memories using an interactive map that's available through the project website. We received over 25 stories, in some cases even images. And these memories provide great insight into the places, resources, and experiences that make the park so special to many, and really document how special Big Basin is. Next slide. And we also invited people to share images that represented their vision for Big Basin, either by hashtagging social media posts and uploading their images to the website. And through the images that are shared, we've learned a lot about the kind of experiences that people are envisioning, as well as gotten ideas about the character and aesthetic that may be desired for future park and features. And this is still, you can still contribute until the 20th of February. Next slide. So we also went to events and happenings within Santa Cruz and in the Greater Bay Area to share information and ask for input. We attended 6 events, including in Santa Cruz, San Francisco, Daly City, and Oakland, and had a virtual exhibit at the Wild and Scenic Film Festival. In addition to hearing about people's visions for Big Basin through these events and letting them know about all the opportunities to participate, we were able to talk with a lot of people who hadn't had the chance yet to visit any of California's redwood forest, not just Big Basin, which really revealed a need for broader outreach to ensure that all Californians have the opportunity to experience and connect with the redwood forest. And between October and February 5th, we received over 950 responses to an online survey. We collected a lot of information on how people used the park prior to the fire and how they envision the park going forward. As shown here, one of the overwhelming results was high interest in camping and trail use, all various types of trail use. Next slide. We had 2 virtual events as well, one in November and one in January, where we had experts come and help establish a deeper understanding of opportunities and constraints for reestablishing the park. The first one, we had almost 250 people participate. And this event focused on how the landscape has been managed over time. And with the second event, we called Returning with Resilience. We had almost 280 people log in to learn both about on-the-ground studies and forest management efforts underway at Big Basin, and also to learn from alternative transportation and design strategies that have been used at other parks to address some of the same issues that will need to be addressed here. So from all of this input together we've been receiving, there are some big themes emerging. And really at the heart of it is that people love Big Basin, we're eager to reconnect, and they really want to make sure that redwoods and the resources are protected. You can see some of the things here, and there'll be more that we'll be sharing in the final documents of this process. So in the input that we've received today, it has, in addition to these themes, is helping to confirm and refine the ideas and vision ideas and guiding principles, which are statements that were first drafted by state park staff in the fall of 2020, soon after the fires. Well, nothing is set in stone yet. This evening, we are going to be turning our focus into how these principles can be implemented. But I want to make sure that everyone is familiar with these because we will be referring back to these big picture concepts. So the vision ideas really packs a lot of big ideas into one spot. I'll briefly read this. Big Basin will continue to be the seed bank for forward-thinking conservation and management of California's redwood forest. By providing access to nature, inclusive storytelling, educational and stewardship opportunities, and recreation for people of all abilities, the renewed park will weld connections between California's landscapes and its diverse communities that fortify both public and ecosystem health. Through strategic and adaptive management that continues to evolve and when necessary pivot based on scientific and indigenous knowledge, the park will continue to be one of California's most iconic natural landmarks, as well as serve a model for California's resilient and inclusive parks. So we have a big task in front of us, but clearly one that's doable within Big Basin. Good, next slide. I'm not going to go through the guiding principles that support these in detail, but we'll be referring to them throughout the evening, and they're available on the website. For those of you who are just listening in, the topic areas are land management, indigenous knowledge, aesthetic reverent design, leadership and resilient park planning, connectivity and coordination, equitable, diverse, and evocative visitor experiences, creating new memories and stewards, and communications. So in considering how these ideas can be implemented on the ground, we're going to want to consider where different uses could take place and where the different facilities could be established. To give you context for our discussion tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about opportunities and constraints more on the ground. So the answer to the question, what areas of the park are most suitable for development, really is going to depend on the landscape conditions, which vary throughout the park, as anyone who's been to the park will have experienced, as well as the type of park uses or development be considered. So on the right of the slide here, you can see some examples of higher, medium, and lower intensity uses. And these are just examples so we can start to have some terminology when we're thinking about the park. But higher intensity uses generally, like visitor center or large camping areas, have a bigger footprint and they're going to attract more people. And lower intensity uses are going to have a smaller footprint. So we've been thinking about these categories of uses and layering them in with landscape conditions to understand some of the opportunities. So we're going to walk through some of those factors. One of them is roads and trails, because access to roads and trails is going to be a consideration for where to site facilities and uses. And again, the higher intensity uses generally are going to need to be closer to major roads. Shown here, you can see the existing road and trail system. And in the big red line is Highway 236. And you may notice here as well, these icons were former facilities and use areas where you'll notice most of those are kind of in that corridor next to the major roads. Now we're layering in streams on top of this map. Healthy streams are important to the overall health of big basin's watersheds and habitats, yet are also very sensitive to nearby and upstream uses. So even lower intensity uses like trails would need to be very carefully designed and maintained to avoid impacts to these resources. Next, you're going to see old growth redwoods. It looks like the little hatch or stipple on the map. We had overwhelming support from outreach about the importance to protect these resources. And while being able to experience redwoods is an essential part of the experience, some of these higher intensity uses could conflict with the goal of protecting these resources. Sensitive slopes are shown here. Slope is a really big consideration for where to develop. A slope of more than over 20%, which is the mid category, is considered too steep to build. Whereas slopes of over 40% are going to be more susceptible to landslides and erosion, as well as fire hazards. So we were considering both watershed impacts and safety when we look at slope. Go ahead, next slide. And lastly, this map highlights in yellow the areas that are more likely to be more appropriate for some of those higher intensity uses based on all the factors we just discussed, looking at access and safety, as well as the lower potential for resource impacts. These areas will need to be further explored to determine their actual feasibility, but are really going to be useful in informing our vision for establishing the park in our discussions tonight. And Chris, do you want to say a little bit more about this map?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Isby. I think this is a really good tool. There's a lot of information on here, but the basic, takeaway is that park that we're looking at is over 18,000 acres. And when you look at areas that are very steep or are distant from roads and have no access or have sensitive resources like old growth and streams, you sort of focus in on those areas that may have opportunity for future development. And those are the yellow areas. So that's important to think about for the future discussions here tonight. And I wanted to just call your attention to some of the focal points here and how they relate to these opportunity areas. So there's three sort of in the middle of your screen that are called out. That's the Saddle Mountain area, Little Basin, and the former headquarter area. Yeah. So Saddle Mountain there on the far right, that is, it's at the crest of the slope when you're coming up 236 from Boulder Creek, and it's before you descend down into the basin. It's an area that burned less intensely, and there are actually structures there that didn't burn. And there's opportunity there in that the slopes are relatively flat in there. And interestingly, you'll see just adjacent to that, above it, there are more opportunity areas in yellow. Those are part of a gateway property that Sempervirens Fund has recently purchased. And we are very supportive of that eventually becoming part of the park. So you can see there's opportunities there as well. If you move to the left a little bit, there's Little Basin, and this is another area. It had a campground, it had facilities in it. It's out of the old growth area served by Little Basin Road. And then if you move a little bit further to the left and up, that is the former headquarters area. And that is the area that had the highest density of historic buildings. They were all lost in the fire. And this is in the old growth. And unfortunately, that burned very, very intensely. So an area to think about potentially some lower impact uses in there, whereas where you look at some of these other areas, they might provide opportunities for some of those medium and higher intensity uses. So turn it back to you, Isby. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Right, so kind of building upon this understanding of site compatibility in some of these sensitive areas of the site, there are a couple specific considerations we're going to be looking at in your small groups tonight. So we're going to just walk through some of those to give you some context. And soon after that, we will have some time for question and answers and then jump into our groups. So the first consideration is about reimagining the visitor center. And Chris, I'm going to actually pass it back to you then.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so we're going to be focusing in on some of these areas in the workshop here in the smaller groups. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the visitor center. And what you're looking at, unfortunately, is a heartbreaking image of the former visitor center. And this is just hours after it had burned over. I think for anybody that spent time in the park or worked in the park, the visitor center, the headquarters, was sort of the emotional and functional heart of the park, and it was a very special place, and it served a lot of the needs of incoming visitors. You know, and pre-fire, this would have been a reflection of the character of building in the 1930s. This was built in 1935 by the California, the Civilian Corps. And it had unique architecture. It was, you know, very much in the heart of the old growth, and you can see old growth there on the left. That's the auto tree, but this was basically adjacent to some of the larger trees in the park, and so it was right in the sensitive areas. And you know, being honest, in recent times, that there was a fair bit of congestion, and this is a very busy spot, and both cars and people, it was pretty busy in here. So some of the opportunities we might talk about as we reimagine this, you know, thinking about a visitor center that really serves all of the visitor needs, and located in an area that is welcoming, can serve as an orientation, and that is convenient and provides access to the most visitors. I think those are opportunities. We have an opportunity to, you know, reflect the guiding principles that are underpinning this reimagining effort, and some of those are on the slide. And really thinking about the intensity of the fire in the old growth, you know, there's an opportunity here to potentially move some of these facilities out of that sensitive environment. There's definitely opportunity to improve circulation and relieve some of the traffic congestion, and provide more equitable access and adequate parking. The other opportunity here is to include, because this is a facility mainly for interpreting to the public, inclusive stories that speak to everybody and tell the full history of land use and the history of the park. So I will turn it over to the next slide for Big Basin Project Planner Will Fort.
Thank you, Chris. I'll cover the next two topics that we're going to be discussing in our small groups today. So the first is reimagining transportation and parking at the park. So we also have this opportunity to reimagine and improve the transportation and parking experience in the park. As Chris mentioned, before the fire, during peak summer season, there was a lot of use, a lot of traffic at the headquarters area. And at times, Highway 236 would back up in both directions. Sometimes people would wait for up to a half an hour to get into the park. At the same time, the parking areas in the old growth basin included paved areas and parked cars at the base and around the roots of these old growth trees. We now have an opportunity to reduce the footprint of the parking in the old growth basin and to enhance both the trees and the visitor experience in this area. And we can do this by expanding parking outside of the old growth area to serve parking demand for the highest peak demand time, and providing shuttles into the heart of the old growth basin. This concept is consistent with the 2013 general plan for Big Basin. It's also been implemented at other parks successfully, such as Muir Woods and the Mariposa Grove in Yosemite. So next slide. Another key topic that we'll be discussing is for this park vision is the future of camping in the park, including the type, the quality, locations, and experiences of camping. And before the fire, the campgrounds at Big Basin were in high demand. They created a lot of memorable and loved experiences by visitors. In the old growth areas, there were 4 campgrounds, a walk-in campground, 2 group camps, tent cabins. There was also campsites and tent cabins at Little Basin, as well as in the backcountry areas, backpacking and bike-in sites. With the loss of all the camping infrastructure, there is an opportunity to reestablish camping in areas outside of the old growth as well. And there are opportunities to design the campground facilities to better meet the needs of visitors. This could include a variety of camp experiences, such as the traditional drive-in sites, walk-in sites, clustered sites for groups that want to camp close to one another, backpacking sites, bike camping, horse camping, group camps, tent cabins or cabins, and RV sites. And I'll turn it over to Isabel to talk through the last one.
Thanks, Will. Great. So I'm going to talk about one fourth topic area that we'll be discussing in the groups this evening, and that is the park character and style. I think as Chris touched on, the facilities, including the visitor center, were very special and treasured resources and had a historic character. And were examples. Many of the facilities at the park were of the CCC construction style and reference that era. But these facilities were built over time and not necessarily with a larger vision or cohesive master plan in mind. And these facilities also had limited defensible space, which has become more and more important in recent years and will be in the future. And also had a bit of combustible building materials that didn't have too many fire safety upgrades. So the opportunities while the situation is difficult to address the park character and style for the future, there really are some great opportunities to take a cohesive look, as we've been trying to do and start to talk about in this visioning process, about complementing the surrounding landscape with the future planning for facilities, to use more better materials, fire safe materials, and design strategies in facility siting and design, to use recycled and renewable materials, maximize energy and efficiency in the building and facilities design. To also think about incorporating elements from the historic buildings in creative ways, and to honor the things that were lost in the fire, but maybe to also possibly use or make reference to the structures that were there. And finally, really honor the historic character while prioritizing safety in building a new park. So these are things that we're going to be talking about in the small groups today. And it was a lot of information, but you'll have additional time to discuss. And we do, before we do that, we do want to take a few questions before the breakout about the presentation. We'd love for the questions at this time to focus on the planning process, because the materials that we just presented, these last few slides, we'll have opportunity to talk about in the small groups. But we did have some questions in the chat, and I'm happy to start with the first one. And one of the questions, I think it was when you were presenting, Chris, that came up about the 1 million visitors and how that was calculated. The question was, that seems like a high number, and is there a breakdown? Is there more information about the access points and where those numbers come from?
It's calculated in various ways, and it's a compilation of day use, paid day use, camping, of which we keep track of, and then there are some estimates of other things. I don't believe we have it broken down by access point, unfortunately. But a lot of this stuff is on the Big Basin website, on the California State Parks under Big Basin, you can gain access to the statistical reports that have all this data in it.
So I think we have several other questions that are, in fact, really good ideas and comments that I'm hoping people share in the breakout room. There's one about train access, and there's another idea about wildlife bridges and underpasses. And we have people sharing more memories that are really wonderful. I think, let's see, do we have one more? See, we do have one more question, and then I think we should probably go to our breakout groups. And this question is, what are the required facilities for fire access, roads, parking, et cetera, that we should be thinking about? The required facilities, and we'll be talking more about this in our small groups, but Chris, do you want to talk about the required facilities?
Yeah, so I mentioned some of this in the recovery work, but this park is serviced by several facilities, including water, wastewater, electricity, excuse me, communications. So that there's those sorts of infrastructure that will be critical. And then there are things like visitor centers and campgrounds, which may not seem, it depends on how you look at it, but you know, those are things that seem like they will need to be replaced. And there are other recreational facilities that you could add to that list. And then there's things you might not think about, like park housing, but a park this size that services this large of a population and has people in it 365 days a year requires that we have staff on hand 24 hours a day. So we might think about some park housing as well.
Great. And Bisbee's right, I think we are up for the breakout group portion of the evening. So we are going to assign a group to each of you. These are randomly assigned groups, and we hope you will enjoy. There will be a facilitator in each room. Feel free to send a chat message if you're having any technical difficulties to tech support in the chat, but otherwise, shortly you will be assigned a group, and hope you enjoy the conversation, and then we'll all come back for kind of a recap and some group conversation. So you should see a button on your screen inviting you to join a specific breakout room. It went by really fast for all the groups, and you might not have gotten to all the discussion topics, but hopefully folks did have a good discussion in their group about some of our topics. And what we'd like to do now is do a really quick rehash, and I'm going to call on each of our facilitators to do a very quick summary of some highlights, maybe things that the group focused on a lot, maybe points of maybe less agreement, and a great idea that came out of your group. So I am going to call on Isby first.
All right, thank you. So we had a really great group with a lot of consensus. So there, on most things, we were generally on the same page. One of the things we talked about that came up in many of the questions was the importance of being able to access the old growth and people really wanting to be able to experience the old growth. And that came up both with the visitor center and campgrounds. I think there was at the same time an understanding that and great ideas about, you know, some of the visitors, why we want the visitor center or some interpretive uses close to the old growth. It could be that some of those functions that the visitor center used to serve, maybe some of them, like some interpretation, could be in the old growth, but others maybe don't need to be there. They could be further out, such as camping reservations. So there's idea of separating out some of these visitor center uses. And there was also a lot of support for shuttle, but we had a good discussion about some of the different characteristics that the shuttle would need as far as easy access and family friendly, and even some fun ideas for how it could be, have a canopy or open air, and make it a good and COVID friendly and fun, easy to use experience.
Thanks. Great. Next, Jesse, do you have your group report?
Yep, I also had a very active group with good bit of consensus. One of the things that we talked a lot about was the visitor center being kind of the interface between people and the forest, and that being an important role of the facility, that it's really kind of the place where you kind of transition from outside to inside, where you're going someplace to kind of get away. Our group had a lot of kind of, they'd been camping at Big Basin and really loved that experience of feeling like you're far away and really wanting to retain that as Big Basin opens, being able to go there and really feel like you're getting away, and that being an important part of it being in the old growth. Although the group really, supported the idea of bringing facilities out of the old growth area, being able to have that camping experience in old growth was still pretty important. We did talk about one kind of great idea that we talked about were ideas for micro gatherings. So the campsites are important, that you feel like you're away, but also a place that you can go and get together with small groups for interpretive events, so that there is a space to kind of gather while you're camping. Another great idea we had for the shuttle was open air shuttles, something that happens in Mariposa Grove, where the shuttle actually has no roof. So you can, as you're going down into the old growth, you get to experience the trees in open air.
Great, thank you, Jesse. Logan, are you there and able to report?
Yes, I have a very exciting report. We had a lovely group and a great conversation. One of the overarching themes over the 4 big ideas was about diversity of experiences and diversity of users. And while protecting the old growth, making sure that there's a variety of ways to access it, maybe not just a shuttle, but a shuttle might be nice, but also, bike in and hike in and different opportunities to access the growth. And importantly, considerations for accessibility and folks with mobility impairments, and making sure that those considerations are noted. One of the things that there was the most consensus about in the group was a need to represent a deeper history of the site, and not just one located in a specific moment in time during the gold rush or during the conservation movement, but one that is rooted in the ancient and indigenous history of the site. And one of the points that I thought was really interesting, and I wish we could have a whole hour to talk about this idea, is this role of technology in educational programming and interpretation. So what is the right balance of including including technology in the educational programming at the visitor center or interpretive materials?
Great, thank you, Logan. Spence? Are you ready?
Hi everyone. It was nice to see that on our first little test exercise that there are a lot of people who are hopeful about this process. When we got into talking about topics, we were, regarding the shuttle, a lot of our group was interested in not just getting on at a parking lot and then having one drop-off spot, but having easy hop on and off access to the shuttle loop. When it came to what makes a quality camping experience, there was a lot of support for it being integrated into the landscape and having privacy, and that requires space. And so finding ways of creating that, or finding spaces where lots of people get to use and see the park, but you are able to still keep the land not trampled or overcrowded, keep the impact low. Another piece about camping that everybody really agreed on was the idea of a kind of gear lending, and that it would be great if there were a way for people who don't own camping gear, or who are new to the park or camping, make it easier for people to get into the park and to go camping by lending gear or having tent cabins, establishing those bus routes to areas outside of the park that bring in urban visitors and people who aren't usually getting into the park. Finally, also just lots of support for education and interpretation about the pre-CCC era of the park and Indigenous history and present use of the area. So.
Great. Thank you, Spence. Ricky.
Hi, Isabel. Thank you. Our discussion was good. I think overall same. We had consensus throughout the ideas, a good balance of neutral and good balance of hopefulness as well. One main thing that we did discuss a lot was the shuttles, and I think this is a topic that we're starting to see. My group really didn't want to limit themselves to only shuttles type of idea or only parking type of idea. They wanted to see something more implemented along the lines that's more on a flex schedule depending on peak season and off season versus also weekdays and weekends. Keep that option available for people that might be carrying a lot of equipment or bigger families, and just a little skeptical of having a only one-sided option for only shuttles, depending on how much what the staffing looks like and what the infrastructure looks like for that, and also potentially including bike lanes and access through other types of mobility types for people to get to the parks during their time that they visit. And then also another main idea was keeping equitable access, right? Having materials in multiple languages and having a diverse staff to engage with a diverse group of visitors that come to the park. And then, as I think someone also mentioned earlier, was tech, and how can we leverage tech and apps to go paperless and have an engaging experience while people are visiting, and also how do you have that in different languages so it is equitable and people do have access to it. And then also something someone mentioned was that they really liked the spaces between campsites. How can we keep that and make sure to save that? People do like that coziness of having that space between other groups of people, and then also not keep people out of the old growth area. People do enjoy that a lot. So preserving that access, and even though some of the visitor center or some activities might be moving out of there, keeping that able for people to visit that when they do visit the park. Okay, that's all right.
Thanks, Ricky. Rachel, you ready?
Yeah. My group also had a lot of agreement. Folks were really supportive of the ideas proposed there, and there was a lot of talk about and ideas for how to and support for moving congestion activities outside of the old growth. That was really a thread that the group felt strongly about. In addition to wildlife impacts, and really encouraging us to look at specific wildlife impacts, what's going on in the park and where are really sensitive areas, and how are we, how is that layer included in everything that we're looking at here? We had for our great ideas, one person suggested a tree tunnel to walk through, like a felled Douglas fir that you could be inside of, and that was just such a cool idea. And there was a lot of support for the commitment to bringing in Indigenous knowledge as a huge enrichment possibility and way overdue in our systems. And there really wasn't much that was contentious in our group.
Thank you. Thanks, Rachel. I think we're up to James.
Hi, everybody. Thanks. We had a good amount of consensus in our group and a lot of similar ideas to what some of the other groups have also discussed. I think one of the comments that kept coming back was accessibility. And, like one of the other groups, perhaps having an open air bus to be able to appreciate driving through the Redwoods and getting through the site. We also had a lot of discussions in regards to bike access. So there's definitely a lot of feedback in terms of that once it becomes more appropriate to talk about more of the details of having that. But that tied into the variety of accessibility to camp in the site. So camping via coming in as bike, as backpacking. So that was another item that was highlighted in there. Gear lending was also something that did come up in terms of perhaps, more novice or beginning campers that may not have the investments of more experienced campers for equipment and such. And the visitor center was also discussed in terms of definitely supporting it with more resilient materials, more natural and fire resistant materials, but also more size appropriate as well. So I think those are some of the really big takeaways, but I think definitely mobility and accessibility to the site were the key takeaways within my group.
Thank you, James. Jessica.
Yeah, we had a pretty lively discussion in my group as well. I think some of the recurring themes on which we had a lot of agreement was the idea that different features or different services provided by a visitor center could potentially be disaggregated among different parts of the park, with the idea that maybe some kind of historical feature could be preserved at the site of the old visitor center, but different interpretive elements and features could be put in alternative locations. There was also a lot of enthusiasm about emphasizing the sustainability of development, lots of enthusiasm for like carbon neutral development, electric vehicles, supporting that, and also emphasizing the importance of like climate change and forest health and potential fire activity. We did a little bit of differences of opinion when we came to the topic of the shuttles, including like weighing pros and cons of reservation systems and the overall shuttle riding experience. But yeah, overall people were pretty enthusiastic about the project.
Great, thanks, Jessica. Will Fort, are you there? You want to do a recap?
Yeah, good evening. I had a really nice discussion with this group. One thing that we focused on a lot was the visitor center and support for the idea of using resilient and new materials, but really a strong desire for the character of the old buildings in the park and trying to bring some of those elements into buildings. And accessibility was another topic that we talked about a lot, and the importance of having access for people with different physical abilities to get to all the parts of the park is extremely important, something we talked about a lot. Some of the ideas that came up, making sure that there are accessible campsites, camping areas, a gear checkout program for people that don't have camping gear came up within our group as well. The importance of campfire programs as part of the camping experience was something that came up. The shuttle program, or the ideas about shuttles, we were also interested in those. One person said they took a shuttle at Pinnacles and really liked that shuttle experience because of the views out of the shuttle at the park were really, really good. People liked the idea that shuttles could serve new areas or new parts of the park that didn't have parking in the past, could provide opportunities to do one-way trips on the trails. There wasn't a lot of disagreement, but one thing that the group wasn't totally in agreement about was about parking in the old growth area. There was support for bringing or understanding for why it might make sense to bring parking out of the old growth, but people also really support the idea of that first experience in the entrance of the park. You're really having a first entrance be in those old growth. Also the importance of having good access for people with limited mobility to get into the old growth.
Great, thanks, Will. Becky, we just have a couple more here and we'll
Great, thanks, Isabel. Our group had a really thoughtful conversation as well, and most of the group was aligned on all of these ideas of moving the facilities outside of the old growth, primarily for the protection of old growth, given the congestion in the past and some of the impacts. So overall consensus there and some really great ideas. I think a recurring theme that came up across the shuttle program, the campgrounds, even the visitor center, was really designing experiences for the diversity of visitors and their needs and the types of experiences that they'd seek. So those that want group experiences, finding areas for that, as well as those that would want more individual experiences, whether that means hiking a little further to get to a campsite in order to get away from the group camping. There was also discussion about the importance of some of the group campfires in the past and just the importance of campfire for a camping experience. So finding ways to make that happen in the new space. ADA accessibility was a big theme in our conversations as well, especially around the shuttle. I'm thinking about what you can access from different shuttle spots that would be wheelchair accessible, and also thinking about kind of how that can also be a win-win for families with strollers. So thinking about those opportunities where those stops can also provide trail accessibility. And another great idea was just thinking about the spectacular habitats across Big Basin beyond just the old growth, and looking to create experiences and access to other places in the park too.
Great. Thank you, Becky. Angelica?
We had a great discussion in our group too. There was support for providing camping experiences outside of the old growth. However, there was kind of a bit of a mixed opinions about whether camping should still occur or should happen inside the growth area, and whether that should be allowed. Folks also would like to see trails planned carefully, especially where new trailheads are planned, and ensuring that we are building trails for all different types of users. There was support for moving the main parking area outside of the old growth area. However, there were some concerns about the shuttle ride and not having kind of easier access to the trailheads. So they would like us to consider how often the shuttle will run, what times the shuttles will be available. There was also support for maybe only having the shuttle on weekends and holidays or during busy seasons. So there was just overall good discussion, and those were just some of the points.
Thanks, Angelica. And I will wrap up with a quick summary from my group. I have to say most of the things we discussed seemed like they were touched on by other groups. But the main idea that floats to the top for me is access for all, access for folks with different means of travel, of camping, of access to the resources, or even not knowing about Big Basin, and really trying to encourage more and more diverse access to Big Basin. So I think in all the conversations that kind of stands out as a theme for my group, and there was quite a bit of agreement on moving resources out of the old growth visitor center, but also providing options in recreation access and educational opportunities. So all great. I'm so glad that folks had good discussions in their groups tonight, and we will be summarizing and synthesizing all the boards that were made. So check the website in a few weeks if you want to view the summary of the meeting tonight, and we'll also be answering some of the questions that were asked that we didn't get to tonight in the chat. So we have a little bit of time left. We have some questions that are in the chat, and we also have some questions for the larger group using Mentimeter, which I think we've done with this group before at previous webinars, just so folks can see how everybody is feeling about some of these topics, kind of taking it to one more dimension. So if you have a chance, we're going to do kind of a large community meeting-wide poll. Please go to this website, or if you have your phone, you can scan this QR code on the screen. And we will have a few questions that you can see there. Oh, and then once you go to the website, you can enter this code to access those questions. And maybe Janet or Logan, we could put this into the chat as well, so folks can see it while we go to the present the questions on the screen. So of the questions you'll see there, the first one is, what is important for you about camping? And on the screen, we're kind of showing the results as people are answering this question with the number of dots representing the numbers of answers. It's kind of a way to see how the pulse of the room, the Zoom room here, and how folks feel about the different types of camping opportunities and what's important about them. I know some people talked about this in their groups. So we'll leave this up for a minute or two. You can see support for every type of camping that we labeled here. Everything from larger car camping opportunities, bike camping sites, to smaller walk-in or backpacking sites. Great. And if you don't get to participate in this, it's fine. We will put these results in the summary, and you can always feel free to send in any additional thoughts to the website, to the email for the project. Great. Jesse, should we go to the next question? So this question is asking, how do visitors access the old growth? And on a scale of more visitors, fewer visitors to more visitors using these means. And it's kind of a way to gauge just on a more to less scale where the support is for these different modes of accessing the old growth relative to one another. So I know a lot of the groups talked about this, a lot of support for accessing the old growth, mostly via trails, with consideration to accessibility, but that a shuttle could be a means for accessing the old growth. And this is just on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being kind of heavier preference or more weight, and 0 being less preference. So this is the average of the scores that are coming in. Great. We go to the next question. Next question is, Big Basin State Park was highly visited before the fires. How would high use affect your experience? I think Chris talked about the numbers, the high visitation, and how folks generally feel about going to Big Basin, given the possibility of crowds or large or smaller numbers of people.
I also want to remind everyone the link is on the top of the screen and it's also in the chat if you're still trying to get to the Mentimeter questions. In the chat and on the top of the screen.
Thanks, Sophie. Great, so the highest scoring option on this question is folks planning their trips or aiming to plan their trip for less busy days. Also some support for crowds not bothering me as long as I can find quieter places within the park. And interesting that no one felt that the more people there are at Big Basin, the more crowds, that is highly desirable. And last question. Oh, did we skip one? Last question, when Big Basin first reopens, if there was only a main road, a few miles of trail, and just a few signs, how do you envision visiting it, or what are your thoughts about going, given that this is likely how it's going to be at first opening? So support to take the shorter hike. Just a few folks just wanting to view the park now. And the most answers going to wanting to explore all day, even if I can't go far. Real supporters of Big Basin here. No one answered that they wouldn't visit, even if there were more limited facilities opening. Great. Okay, and then this is just the word cloud. Do we have 1 minute to do this? I know we want to wrap up. One more slide back. A new gateway. So that was the image of the previous gateway at the park. And this question asks, describe the vision for the park and what would the gateway say? Great. So again, these are things that feel free to send in. We still have opportunity to send comments in via the website. And there's also, I see some comments coming in the chat about this. So Jesse's scrolling through some of the ideas people had. So we wanted to end tonight's meeting, which is the last public meeting as part of the visioning process. As you know, as we mentioned, there will be additional opportunities to weigh in and participate in conversations about the future of Big Basin. But we thought we'd leave you with some of these ideas and really want to thank you for your time and energy to participate in our meeting this evening.
We did receive some really great questions in the chat, and we will be responding to those. We are out of time today, but we'll be making sure to get responses to those following the meeting on the website.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Wishing you a great evening, and feel free to reach out or continue to check the websites for updates.